Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me in this first part of a multi-series going over a series of blog posts that I recently put up. Soon to be a white paper if you prefer PDFs instead of URLs, I guess. So this first part goes over what it's like to do what I call greenfield projects or brand new projects in a cloud-native environment. And cloud-native is just sort of a fun, fancy word we have for doing your software development and delivery in a very contemporary cloud style. That is, a native of cloud instead of dragging your old way of doing stuff into the modern era. So let's go to the what you call the executive summary slide. Sometimes what I like to think of as conclusions. I wanted to keep this this webinar brief so that if you really want to spend lots of time, you can go read the lengthy article that is not brief. So I won't read through all of these, but I like to begin my presentations with an overview of what I'm going to talk about and kind of like the major points. That way, if you get bored, you can kind of leave or drop off. It'd be better if you didn't. Or, you know, it also reminds me what I was going to talk about. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what I'm going to go over here. First of all, after introducing myself more, I want to go over why companies are being motivated to focus on this cloud journey, if you will. Why they're focusing more and more on improving how they do their custom software development, their in-house software. What's driving that? It's actually something that I and other people at Pivotal cover a lot, so I won't go in it very much. There's all sorts of other sources you can look up about the drivers for this and why we're expecting more from IT and why custom-written software is looking like the most important thing that the IT department, so to speak, can do for its company nowadays. And so if companies want to improve the way that they're doing their software development and they want to more closely align their ability and capabilities of doing software development to the business, a lot of what we are finding companies are finding is that they're not quite as good at that as they need to be. And so they need to start changing how they do things. They need to change their behaviors in order to change their process and improve. And that's a large part of what this Cloud Native Journey series is about, is how you change your behavior to change your process, to change what your IT department does that helps you essentially change your business and brings custom-written software at the core of how your business is competing and differentiating and having a good product to provide your services. And then the rest of the presentation goes over, this presentation goes over about 9 sort of areas to start looking at when you start off with a brand new project that'll help you kind of shuffle at a quick pace along to being a cloud native, right? So it's a collection of what I would say are the best practices that I'm seeing companies start to adopt and learn. And a lot of these will be they'll feel a little weird and maybe not be quite what we're used to in IT. But again, focus on the fact that in order to change how you're doing things, you know, by definition, you need to change the behavior and change how what you're doing and focus on new behaviors. So, you know, hopefully, as they say on the airplanes nowadays, if this doesn't look interesting to you, now's your last chance to get off the plane before we close the doors. And with that, I always like to give a brief introduction of who I am, just so I'm not some strange voice out in the wild here. But I work at Pivotal, obviously. I've been here for a little under a year now. It'll be a year come January. And over my career as both an industry analyst and working on strategy and M&A and writing software, I've always been focused on trying to figure out how to improve software, right? Like the development of software, the way it's used, the way we come up with what features it's in it, how we run it. All of these things are, you know, we sometimes fancy ourselves engineers, but I think we're a little more just figuring out how all of this works. And it's been great over the basically 20 years of my career to see us go from the sort of mid-90s to where we are now and really get to the point where we're still greatly improving the quality of software and therefore how it affects and improves our lives. I mean, that sounds kind of grandiose, but if you think about how much you interact with software every day, if you can improve that, you'll be better off personally and business-wise. And that's a lot of what I focus on, you know, I've been focusing on for the past 10 or so years and what I kind of focus on at Pivotal. So a lot of what I'm going over here, the end result is that if all of this pays off, we'll basically improve the quality of software out there and how it helps us out. And so to that end, if you kind of enjoy that kind of theme, you can follow a lot of the podcasts that I do. I do a Pivotal podcast and several of my own, and I write columns here and there about DevOps, which is something we'll touch on lightly here. And there's all sorts of content you can get just in that conversation. And I am always generally interested in people's reaction to this content and how they're thinking about improving software. So it would be great if you want to reach out to me in Twitter or email. I'd love to discuss your thoughts and encounters about all of this, because as you'll see, it kind of informs the prattle I have about how to improve software out there, and how it can improve businesses and people's lives. And all the anecdotes and stuff from people out there is, you know, if I remember the quote, the definition of data is more than one anecdote. And that's really what I'm after. So as I was saying, I like to start with any discussion like this of software, especially in a business context, of defining why you would care, right? So like whenever you're asking someone to do something difficult or you know, that seems like not necessarily entertaining or that's different, it's really good to give them a motivation of why it's happening. And especially in a cloud-native conversation, in a lot of the conversations that Pivotal gets involved in, it's really important to understand the context of why you would be doing things differently and what's driving that. So a lot of that is really summarized best, I think, in this figure. I mean, there's several other presentations I give and conversations that I have. You can see one of them referenced down there, that really at length describe what's summarized here in this prediction from Gartner. And that is that more and more businesses, the way that IT will be useful for them is by focusing on their custom-written software. So as software as a service becomes more and more prevalent, basically the amount of effort that you have to spend managing IT, the old packaged software, on-premise things, it becomes less and less. So at Pivotal, for example, most all of our stuff that we use as a business is a software as a service. So we don't really have an IT department in Pivotal that manages that software. And instead, you know, the IT department manages more valuable things rather than just keeping software up and running. And you know, we also focus on obviously the software we write as a product. And other companies are encountering this as well, and we see this across Pivotal businesses. From people, you know, our public references from people like Allstate and Humana and Lockheed, that because they don't have to focus on running all this on-premise software more and more, they can focus on this build nature, on writing custom software that helps differentiate their business and helps create something different about their business, right? So no one really differentiates their software on the email that they use or the calendaring service, or, you know, to some extent even the CRM system that they use, because we all can use those same systems and they're not differentiating like they were 20 years ago. So what's left for IT to do is to spend those resources on creating unique software to the business. And so you see predictions like this that say sometime in the near future, you'll see more focus on building software rather than just buying it. And that thrust really is what we see in the people that interact with Pivotal, the increasing amount of large companies and other companies, is they're looking to really perfect their software capabilities. And I would simplify things to a great degree. And so I feel like the goal of that, right? So if businesses want to look to custom-written software more and more of how they start differentiating and running their businesses, if they want to become what I like to think of as software-defined businesses, businesses that are defined by their software, the way that they want to achieve that is by putting this in place, a continuous delivery loop. Now, a continuous delivery loop like this is the evolution really of a lot of agile development things that started in the late 90s, that we've been doing a lot over the course of Pivotal Labs and now Pivotal, and it evolved into continuous integration where you're automating your building and testing, and then it's evolved into continuous delivery where not only you're automating all of your testing and building, but you're automating as much as possible about the full delivery and operations and running of that. And so we have this great boon that we have with cloud software that's automated and added a tremendous amount of self-service to the infrastructure layers that's really removing a lot of the resource vacuuming up of just manually installing things and taking care of them. But now what becomes very interesting and what allows you to perfect and hone the quality of your customized software is this thing at the bottom. And this is the part that, if you forget this part, you're really missing out on the full benefits of continuous delivery, and that's this feedback loop. So what this continuous delivery loop is angling for you to do is to make it so that you can start delivering your software to your end users, so you can have your users start using your software on a weekly, if not daily basis. Now, At first, that sounds like just sort of like, you know, just going faster, which can be cool on its own, right? Like running fast and doing things quickly is kind of nifty. But you should think about the business utility of that. What value do you get from that? So let's think about that by if we deliver software every 6 months or every 12 months, we're going to have a 6 or 12-month loop of basically improving the software. It's going to take us a long time to put new improvements in there and really perfect it. So it'll take us 6 months to react to anything new. But if we can deliver software every week or every day, we have a 7-day or 24-hour cycle where we get more input and more data and we can try new things. So we can run even more experiments and we can start to improve that software on a faster basis. And if you think about how quickly we expect businesses to evolve and come up with new things, businesses could then start to use this capability to change how their software operates, to start changing what their business processes are and what their products are and what their offerings are, and that can become a real competitive advantage, right? So think about all the businesses you interact with, and whenever they come out with a new feature or a new way of doing stuff, it is something that not only essentially keeps you with those people, right? Like so it holds back competition from poaching you from those businesses. It helps with retention. But even if you're not an existing customer of those businesses, they're putting out new features, and it gives them a chance to recruit new customers, right? So the ability for companies to basically offer new things is directly enabled by the velocity, the speed at which their software can get new features out there. And then it's also compounded by the fact that they can always improve that software. So, you know, you're not left using the same old software year after year. It actually evolves and gets better. And we experience this in the consumer space. But in the business world, we're not really used to this so much. We're not used to software improving on a weekly basis. We just sort of put up with it, essentially. But if we sort of unlock that ability for business software and software from businesses that consumers use a lot to evolve as rapidly as they do in the consumer space, just think of the opportunities and options that the businesses will have out there. And that's what we see a lot with Pivotal customers, is they're starting to use their ability to improve their software as a core way to improve their business and therefore, you know, not only retain customers but grow their customer base. And that all is just fancy talk for make more money and be more profitable, essentially, if that's your thing. So, you know, that all sounds great. And you hear offerings like that and you think like, well, why isn't everyone doing that if there's such dramatic results for it? And I think a lot of the reason comes down to a lot of this stuff is new, and most of the advice that you get about how you get to that point where you can start delivering software on a weekly or daily basis sort of looks like this. We just say, all you got to do is basically cover it in cloud. Just have the rainbowy throw up of cloud all over everything, rub a little bit of cloud on it, and it'll be fine, right? Like, you just need to do cloud. And I've seen this in my career where people like have a cloud strategy, and they're not really too sure what they're going to do about it or what it means, but they just want to inject cloud into it. Because the follow-on advice we have, you know, like once you've been thrown up by the cloud, is a lot like this old drawing advice, right? Like, because you're dealing with such experts who have gone through doing cloud stuff that they're just sort of like, yeah, you draw a few circles, and then, I don't know, you draw the rest of the owl. And that's really what a lot of advice can amount to. And you know, you want to have more of that Bob Ross experience where you're sort of watching an expert with a fantastic afro on a black background, like go through and really execute on how he goes from just a few random brushstrokes into a full-fledged owl, metaphorically speaking. And so this kind of lack of explaining how you get to that fancy owl on the right side of the screen is a lot of what I spend my time studying and what really has launched me into writing this series and trying to explain how you get to that point and get all your happy little trees and cabins in the woods by the lakeside. So just to signpost out what's in this series, in case you haven't been paying attention, this is the Greenfield part over there on the left that I'll go over. But there's two other parts of the series, and at the end I'll have a link to the blog post if you want to read the full series. But I kind of have tranched out the sort of high-level advice when it comes to this kind of transforming to a cloud native into Greenfield, that is new projects, into working with legacy or existing systems, whereas I like to joke, that's the stuff that makes all the money by definition. And then also, once you've kind of conquered those or dealt with those two types of projects, you then want to transform the entire organization. So there's more of looking at the larger organization and transforming them. And in case, again, you're lost and you just showed up here randomly, you're in the Greenfield one. And twice in December, we'll do another webcast of the other two parts. And looking across those three things, you should have a pretty good idea of how to, you know, maybe you won't have that perfectly executed owl over there, but you'll have something that probably looks a little bit better than what my kindergartner draws, delightful as his pictures are. And you'll kind of know how to bridge the gap between two circles, you know, with a bunch of rainbow puke over it, and something that's beneficial. So with that, you know, let's get into the Greenfield projects. And what I mean by Greenfield, just to be specific, is essentially you're going to start doing cloud-native style development on a brand new project that has very little, if no, connection to an existing code base. And it doesn't really have a lot of constraints that are driven by existing success. So one of the examples I'll cite from Humana, they actually did take an existing project, but they were given a lot of latitude to change and modify things. And then they came up with new projects that were new from scratch. And Greenfield projects are these ones where you're not really beholden to existing success. You don't have the shackles of success, as I like to call it, that you have with legacy. So you're given a lot of freedom to try new things and experiment with things. And also a lot of this type of projects, when you go out and read and hear at present conferences and people talking about projects, most all of them are Greenfield projects, right? Because most of them come from startups that don't have, you know, decades and decades of success and existing IT to deal with. They're just starting from scratch and learning new things. And so these are the funnest, but sometimes not the most important projects that you'll have out there. But they're very key to like learning and figuring out how to be a cloud native. It's really the proving ground and the training that you'll go to that you then spread out into your legacy systems and then your entire organization when you do things. And they're usually the things that people focus on at first. So there's a lot of principles that I'll go over that are, what are things that you do at the beginning of this journey that help make you better as you progress throughout the journey as well? And I contrast, you also have brownfield applications, although I delightfully don't really use that phrase. I call it legacy instead. So the first thing in looking at greenfield applications is that this is where you're given enough latitude that you should really take advantage of to start changing your behavior in order to change your process. So one of the things that you'll find when you're trying to become an organization that focuses more and more on software is you probably are going to need to change how IT is organized, how it operates, and what it does. That is, you're going to need to change the culture of IT. Because if you're like most places, the IT culture that you have has been all about optimizing the way IT runs, and it's more about keeping the lights on rather than inventing the light bulb, essentially. And those are two very different ways of operating. And keeping the lights on is great once you have a light bulb, but if you need to invent light bulbs, you're going to have to retool and do things in a different way. And I always like to begin on this helpful note here. And that is, this is kind of, I don't think it's apocryphal. I think it actually happened because it was documented in Twitter, so it must be real. But you know, Adrian Cockcroft, he was at Netflix and now he's at Battery Ventures, and he's one of the spokespeople for this sort of new way of doing things. And he goes out there and talks about how Netflix does stuff and how they're so great and like their practices and are very pragmatic ways of doing things. And most people kind of react in this way that you see documented here. They're like, oh, that all sounds great, but Netflix has all these superstar people, and basically like we're a bunch of Eeyores over here and we could never do that. And you know, the clip from Adrian is basically like, well, we hired them all from you, which is to say there's no magic to it, right? Like we didn't like grow these people in vats. They weren't like, you know, like I don't know, Khan from Star Trek or wherever. They were like bred to be these superstar people. Like we just changed their behavior and we trained them and we thought about how we could use these existing people with their existing skills in a new way, and we set up an environment in which they could thrive and operate like this. So that's the first thing to realize, is that you probably have the human capital, the people that you need and all the potential. You just may not be using it right. And you need to focus on, how do I change the behavior and the culture we have to take advantage of everything that we have here. And what makes us not superstars or unicorns is that we're not behaving like them. So start focusing on how you can change that behavior. And at the bottom there, you can see this talk, There Is No Talent Shortage, that Andrew Schaefer gave several years back. And it's, if you prefer like a 45, 60-minute treatment at this point, it's a good delightful overview of the fact that like you probably have the talent that you need. You're just not accessing and creating them and training them correctly. So to that end, there's this notion that you'll encounter a lot out there, which sounds basically the opposite of any advice people would give you if you wanted to be successful in a normal corporate world. And that is that you need to embrace this idea of failing fast, which is, to be honest, like a bunch of West Coast bravado about how, like, you know, we run really fast and break things and therefore we're successful, right? But the way to think about what this fail fast mentality is that, again, when you're in this position of innovating and creating, right? Remember, instead of keeping the lights on, you're inventing the light bulb. You need to set up an environment where you're continually learning, right? Like you're not there to optimize a process. You don't really know exactly what's happening. You're there to create something new. And there's a difference in mentality there, right? Most businesses and corporate cultures are set up on, you know, kind of like that well-coiffed business guy on the side, right? Like they're really set up where everyone believes they know what they're doing, and if anyone operates in a way where they admit that they don't know what's happening, they're punished, right? They go from, as I like to joke about it, VP of being a P&L to VP of special projects, which is usually not a good position to find yourself in. It means that you don't have this confidence that it requires to be that guy doing his business over there. But what we see, and what I've seen over my career analyzing this, is that the companies that innovate and come up with new things, they're very honest about the fact that they don't really know what they're doing, and instead they put a framework in place, and they have a culture internally of learning from failure, right? And I would put it another way, that if you're not failing, you're not learning, and if you're not learning, you're not going to come up with anything new. So if you want to innovate and do software in a new way, you need to really understand what this idea of failing fast is. And this also means changing your incentives and your structures around. Like, I've witnessed this firsthand, where it really is the job of management to emphasize that, like, we need to go over what our failures are and our learnings, because it is by learning more and more that we'll come up with new things. So that's something to really think about how you're doing on a greenfield or a new project, is really emphasize over and over again that we want to learn. And so don't be afraid to hide failure from us. Let's fail in new ways tomorrow, right? Let's learn from our failures and grow with it. So that's really the first step you want to get to, is admitting that you don't really know what's going on. And greenfield projects are especially great for that, because by the virtue of it being a new project, people kind of don't know what's going on, and it's expected in a new project. Typically, you know, once you have that mindset, you want to choose a series of small projects to start experimenting with and learning the new way, and also building up validation that it works. And so I like to think of this as essentially building up a small series of projects that if they go well, you can kind of snowball upward into a big monstrous project that's highly visible. But you want to start with one that has low expectations for a few reasons. One, because, you know, if you're in, usually I would call it, if you're in a corporate culture that's very caustic, that is a normal culture that doesn't really celebrate failure because you're learning through it, you need to set up a project that if it doesn't go well, you don't really get punished, right? That you can sweep it under the rug. But if it does go well, you can snowball it into a bigger project, right? So starting small is a way of doing risk management, and it's also like a valid way of learning something. And it also, because it's a small project, you'll be able to rapidly go over it and get more learnings from it than if it's like a big 6-12-month project. So spend a lot of time picking your initial 2 to 3 projects that you're going to do, because that'll be key to the learnings and the overall success that you get as you expand out into different cloud projects. And there's a reference down there to the Concise Executive Guide to Agility, which is it's a bit old, but there's actually some extensive commentary on there on how to select the right initial projects, which I think is very helpful for people who are in this position in larger companies. And just as a proof point of that, one of our pivotal customers, Humana, they went through this cycle where they had a relatively small project called Vitality, and it's one of these software processes where, like, you know, if you tell it you went for like a 10-mile run, it gives you some points, and then once you get enough points, you can go buy like some new shoes or something like that. So but it didn't have a lot of engagement around it. Only 3% of the people were using it, and it wasn't an extremely high visibility project. And their goal was, let's apply this cloud-native mentality and improve this project. And their goal was to achieve 10% engagement with it. And after applying a lot of the things that we're talking about along this cloud-native journey, they tripled their expectations, and they got 30% engagement. And it was quite a big success that allowed them to then go into another project that is used for, if I remember, managing sort of people with systemic disease problems and helping them out with their day-to-day life. And that project was also a success, applying applying this sort of cloud-native thinking. And so they slowly built up trust and learnings in this way of doing things. And then finally, the high visibility project that they did that kind of like cemented their series of small projects is they wanted to launch a Apple Watch application on the first day of Apple Watch's availability, this Q application that helped people monitor their health and encourage healthy behavior. And they were able to do that following kind of like this cloud-native way of doing stuff and using Pivotal Cloud Foundry as the backend for it. And that, that really was sort of like the apex of their Greenfield journey, and it allowed them to progress to using cloud-native thinking in the rest of their organization, because they chose a series of small projects, started small, and then it finally ended up with the big visibility one. So think about how you, when your Greenfield projects, can set up a similar journey like that. And just one last note, if you think about each of those applications as I was describing them, I mean, think about a health insurance company. The healthier their customers are, the more profit that company will have, because the less payouts they'll have, essentially, right? I mean, that's how insurance works. And so each of those applications, while kind of small projects or low visibility, if those projects could become more used by the populace, are part of the mission-critical part of that business. And so because they were successful, it really proved out that this stuff worked. And at the end, we'll get to the fact of what you take when you have these small projects. You can start doing a lot of internal marketing once you've built up trust with these projects to expand out everywhere else. But really picking those projects is key. So the next thing that you want to do when you're doing your Greenfield projects, in the same way that it's important to pick the right kind of project, is you want to pick the right kind of composition of your team. And we at Pivotal, we have a lot of opinions, I think great opinions about what your team formation is and what it should look like. And this is over a couple of decades of us doing it in Pivotal Labs and now in the greater Pivotal, where we have found, and people in the software industry have found this as well, who are software vendors, right, that the more you separate out the roles that it takes to get software out the door, generally the worse off your software is going to be. So you want your team to be as integrated as possible. You want all of the roles on one team responsible for that software that's needed to make it good, right? So obviously you need software developers. The software doesn't write itself. But nowadays, when everything's delivered as a mobile application or over the network or as a SaaS, everything's delivered over the internet instead of packaged software, you need operations people who not only can run the software, but can work with developers to understand how to make that software run better and more operational, right? So this is where DevOps comes about, and there's a whole body of knowledge around that. But it's not only that. You also want design people on the team who know how humans interact with the system and can start informing and designing how the software works better, right? Like if you look at the wildly successful technologies out there, a lot of them are successful not only because they have good developers and operations people, but that they have design people who understand the interaction between the computer, so to speak, and the software. And then you also will want product people who know how to manage, not only do project management, but know how to manage the flow of product. You want QA people on there. And then depending on the type of software you're on, you want other people on that team. So again, when you're in a Greenfield project and you have a lot of leeway to do things differently, you want to take advantage of that to do things like actually follow this two-pizza idea, right, of let's have 6 to 12 people who are dedicated to the software, not siloed out, who communicate through tickets and help desk and process, but they're actually on that team working together day to day, and let's actually experiment and see if that improves the quality of the software that we have. And our findings have been, over many projects over years, that it actually greatly does increase the quality of the software. And again, if you look at how software companies like Pivotal and others operate, this is something that they hew to and follow pretty closely. So if you are trying to emulate how software companies operate and improve your own software, it's good to take them pretty literally when they say things like, you should combine these teams together. Don't worry about locally optimizing by siloing them out, and combine them together and build up that trust and try it out on your Greenfield projects. Similarly, as you're trying to become a better software company, a cloud-native company, one thing that it's almost nauseating to have someone pipe it, back at you so many years after we've gone into unit testing and QAing, but that I still find people lacking, is that especially when you're doing a new project, you really want to make sure that you're being strict about your unit testing and QAing, right? And think about how fragile and how dangerous and how fearful you are about touching existing legacy code. And one of the reasons is because you have no idea, you don't have enough test coverage to know if you make changes, if it's going to break anything. And use that fear to drive the quality of your testing, right? It seems counterintuitive at first, but you really want to spend a lot of time not only doing unit testing, but doing your testing in production, doing performance testing, and even looking into things like the chaos monkey and the lemur to test things in production. And you also want to do testing of your design, right? So if you remember that feedback loop, because you can deploy weekly if not daily, start testing out your assumptions about the way you implement things. Do A/B testing. And really start thinking about testing as experimenting, but really be strict first about your test coverage, right? So most people will say you want to target somewhere between 90 and 95% test coverage. Like if you can get 100% coverage, that's great. But really be strict about testing, because that's what's going to prevent a bunch of technical debt from calcifying your ability to do anything in the future. So when you have a clean slate, always start new, right? Like when you've got a brand new set of teeth, you should finally start flossing for real, not just kind of nod when people tell you to do that. And just in case you're wondering about flossing, like I always forget, but you're supposed to floss before you brush, if I remember, which I should get on that, because I don't take this advice with my legacy teeth so much. But just try to do the testing. It's very important. So the next two areas that I want to go over are more of what you do when it comes to the development of your software, so you're actually writing the software, and how you're architecting your software. And these two aspects are different than in traditional three-tier application development. They're different in a cloud-native environment. And I won't go into detail into these in great depth, because they're both areas that we in the Pivotal world and the broader cloud-native world spend a lot of time talking about. But they're two areas you should get familiar with, and you should use the opportunity of your Greenfield projects to start becoming familiar with them. The first one are, you could call it principles or an approach that you have to how you write your software to be cloud ready. And they're really best encapsulated out of these 12 factors, or 12 principles that came out of Heroku a while ago. And you can look them up at 12factorapp.net, if I remember. And they cover a mentality and approach to writing your software that is essentially an evolution of distributed application development in a very restful web cloud-native way. So you see a lot of discussion about communication should be done over HTTP. Configuration should be a separate thing that's injected into the applications that you have. And also, when setting up continuous delivery process, we not only want to check in our source code, our application source code, into our version control system, but any other code that we write, any automation code, any scripting that operations use, is part of that product, and so we check that in as well. And there's a lot of thinking behind, like thinking about the way that you model out the subcomponents of your system as processes, and so forth and so on. But it's really good to study and understand these different 12 factors, because this kind of establishes the contract for how you write applications in a cloud-native way. And if you write your applications following these 12 factors, they will be compatible with how cloud-native runtimes like Pivotal Cloud Foundry and other ones run. So you have to start writing applications this way. And there's a tremendous amount to learn and understand about how data is managed that becomes very important as well. But following these 12 factors gets you to all the advantages and the benefits that you get into when you follow a cloud-native style. So simply, the way you architect your applications in a cloud-native way generally follows along this microservices mentality. Now, lucky for you, if you haven't read this book, we have a free book that one of the Pivotal folks, Matt Stein, wrote, and it's great, and it's concision and brevity. It's about 80 pages or so. You can get the link there, but it really covers this architectural style called microservices, and it has some examples of how you can use things like Spring Cloud, which is fully integrated into Pivotal Cloud Foundry, or you can use it on your own if you want. And a lot of the learnings from people like Netflix and the way that they do microservices, how you can start to use those managed processes and those architectures to write things in this way. So I'll just say two things briefly about this and then kind of go into the benefits of it. But think about microservices as a really blown up, in a good way, not blown up as destroyed, but expanded way of how you might interact with piping together a bunch of commands on the Unix command line, right? So you have a bunch of discrete little services, right, all those little commands that you might pipe together on a command line. And they're each doing independent things that they're very good at and passing the results on to the next thing. And the sum result of that on the command line is some result that you want, right? So you're stringing together a bunch of processes. And, you know, on the scale of a distributed system like most applications are nowadays, that analogy starts to break down its simplicity, but it's that kind of Unix, Linux mentality of doing things. And a large part of why microservices are interesting is because each of those different independent processes, not only are they independent pieces of technology, but in general, the teams and the roadmaps they're operating on operate independently as well. You try to have as few dependencies as them as possible. They can each evolve on their own pace, which hopefully means they rapidly evolve and they're more featureful and functionful, so to speak. So instead of kind of, if you have like 5 different processes that it takes to execute some function, like searching a book or ordering a product or whatever, you will always, the overall end-to-end process is always going to be as slow as the most slowly evolving part of that, right? So if it takes 4 months to evolve one of those 5 processes, then everything is going to be held up by that thing that takes 4 months to evolve. Whereas in this style, you're trying to have each one evolve at its own speed. So this allows you, going back to more rapidly getting things into production rather than more slowly, it allows you to rapidly evolve things. Now, also, because you've broken down things into more simple parts, they become easier to manage on their own. Now, of course, managing them in aggregate becomes more complicated because you have these moving parts that have kind of a lack of strong dependency between them. But as we'll get into, you start relying on the platform and the middleware services around it to manage a lot of that for you. And there's all sorts of things that, as in distributed system development, that helps you sort of hide that complexity and manage that complexity so that you can focus on the benefits that smaller parts get from you. And the overall benefit of this approach, the hope is that you'll have organizational agility, right? So if you think about breaking the organizational dependency between all these different services, each service can evolve at its own pace, and the whole organization isn't slowed down again by that slowest moving part of it. So going back, right, like the 12-factor way is kind of the way you start developing your applications. And when you're thinking about not only application architecture, but the enterprise architecture that you have within your organization, a microservices approach is what you should be looking at more and more, especially in the opportunity that you have in a Greenfield application, to start to become one of these cloud-native ways people who are doing software. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of complexity that comes with a bunch of these different services running around and being composed, or as we used to say, mashed up into one way. Now, if you remember a previous approach, you know, if you do sort of like one back in our attempts at making large distributed applications better, we had web services or SOAP-driven SOA stuff, and that became a very complicated soup of things that became very hard and difficult to manage. And there's a delightful jaunt into enterprise service buses, which were trying to solve that same problem and also became a bit of an issue. So there's typically a platform that you rely on to take away a lot of the complexity of all of these different services that are running for you. And in the current era, what I've noticed a lot of people doing is that there are many options for creating and managing container-based applications out there, and for orchestrating and job scheduling. There's all sorts of infrastructure as a service and automation things out there. There's lots of piece parts out there that over, until recently, people have had to cobble together on their own because there hasn't been finished platforms like Pivotal Cloud Foundry is, that pull all these things together into an integrated, opinionated way of doing things. So, what I like to say is that if you are in the business, if you're in product, if what's valuable to your customers is selling that cloud platform, then you should probably build it on your own instead of cobbling together a bunch of stuff off the shelf or off the web and relying on yourself to maintain and do that. I mean, obviously, that's what Pivotal does because that is what we sell, right? So we build a lot of our own software and pull in standards and open source things as well, but we build the platform that we sell because that is our product. However, if you do that on your own and that's not the actual end product that you have, you're in one of those situations I always like to jokingly call it, now you have two problems. Not only do you have the problem of having to write the actual application, the actual software that you're using for your business, but now you also are responsible for that platform that you built. So you have to maintain it and run it, improve it, you've got to build all the stuff that's kind of represented on here. This is a diagram, mysteriously, for being a Pivotal conversation without the Pivotal Cloud Foundry logo on it. But it represents all of the components, or most all of the components and services that a cloud platform like Pivotal Cloud Platform does for you, or Pivotal Cloud Foundry does for you. And you know, as you start to walk through, as I do with a lot of people that I go visit at large enterprises, this is kind of like what they end up having to build if they do it on their own. And again, if that's what you want to do, then that's perfectly fine, but you're going to end up being responsible for that and spending a lot of time with it, whereas you could just come to someone like ourselves or other people who are offering this and just get it off the shelf. So all I want to emphasize here is realize that you're going to end up with a platform no matter what. And you should make sure that you don't have an accidental platform that you accidentally have to end up maintaining. Make sure that it's purposeful, and sometimes a better option, as we were talking about earlier, is really to buy it instead of build it on your own, so you can focus on what's actually valuable to your customers and your end users, the actual software and applications that you're running inside this cloud platform. So finally, we'll go down the happy path, and let's assume that everything was great with your small series of projects, and you figured out the new cloud-native way of doing things, and you've got your cloud platform humming along and everything. So how do you start rolling this into the next phase of your cloud-native journey? And this is another area where traditional IT is not really, I don't know, skilled at. You know, they're the IT department, not the marketing department, and they're also not the HR department that's responsible for training and staffing. But a huge part of becoming a software organization is going to become all of this internal-facing stuff of basically training people and also building up the internal credibility. So this repeated boasting and talking about, we have proven that this way of doing things is successful, and therefore we should do it more broadly if we as the whole organization want to benefit from it. So right from the beginning, you don't have to necessarily start doing this, but start planning for and thinking about how, when you are successful, you can start marketing internally and grow the influence that you have, right? And you know, we tend to call this evangelism in the technology world, right? How can you go out and explain how things are working and prove it? And you know, I've also seen a lot of people be successful with creating internal tech summits. Like, I actually go speak at a lot of these where companies have realized that they need to change, they need to become cloud native, if you will, software-defined businesses. And they're starting to trust this cloud way of doing stuff, and they have some early success. So they get everyone in the IT department and hopefully relevant business people to come to a 1 or 2 day internal summit, and they just kind of go over what's happening. They kind of go over a lot of what we're talking about here, and they have sessions with each other, and they share things with each other. It's more than the sort of drudgery of the weekly brown bag, where we're going to learn new things about JavaScript and CSS and all that stuff, right? It really is like, how are we going to change our cultures? And you can really tell when these internal summits are legit and effective because they'll have top executives there most all of the time giving presentations and really talking with them. It really represents the company wanting to do things. And the end result of this, kind of a little bit out of the bounds of being a Greenfield project, but you know you've been successful with this, where you've seen what several of our customers have done, where they actually set up these centers of excellence that don't really suck, that are real centers of excellence. And they usually call them labs. Like, it might be a digital experience lab or whatever, but they realize that in order to, as we'll get into in the transformation journey, in order to change the entire organization, they need to set up a competency center where people go and they get training and they experience what it's like firsthand. And that's kind of the ultimate end result of doing internal marketing. But the point is, as you become successful in these Greenfield projects, you really will need to focus on this internal marketing or spreading that benefit around. Like, people aren't just going to rifle through like a 60-minute presentation or kind of read a Word doc. They're going to need a lot more hands-on, you know, marketing and training and just person-to-person time to figure out how this can apply to them, and also to build up the trust that this weird new way of doing stuff is actually effective. I just wanted to end with, you know, if this stuff seemed interesting and you're curious of how you might expand it out more, first of all, you can go look up the full series. There's a URL you can follow or easily type in there, and again, it's actually a 4-part series. It's the first part that's an overview, but there's 3 main parts to it that really go over in depth a lot of the advice that I was going over here. There's a few things that I left off for brevity, so there's some more there if you go read it. And there's also a whole other section about what to do and how to integrate with your existing portfolio and legacy systems. And there's also, what do you do when you, as many of our customers do, when you want to change how the entire company thinks about and uses software? How do you do large organization transformation? And I'll be giving similar webinars about that in the coming weeks if you want to sign up for those. And I'm also always happy if you want to talk out of band, if you remember my contact information, feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, I'll see you guys at those presentations, and hopefully you can make the time to either attend them or listen into the recordings. So I appreciate those of you who have stuck around this time for listening in on this. It's like I said, hopefully I got across at the beginning. I'm always genuinely interested in talking about and figuring out how to improve just software out there. So it's always a pleasure to talk to people about that. And I'd be happy at this point to take questions from people and kind of go over anything that we have time for. So I see we have one question here, and one of them is sort of a, I didn't really go over many technologies, so it's logical to ask this. So this actually comes up a lot. So the question is, does all this happen in public cloud or private cloud, or to summarize it on my own, how is that related? And I'll be sort of I don't know, ashamedly honest here. A long time ago, when I was a developer, it seemed to me that you would be crazy if you didn't just use public cloud stuff for things. Like, that seemed like so obvious, because I do still have pretty strong developer roots. Like, I always like the easiest way of doing things, and that always seemed easy. And as I've worked in the industry longer, over the I don't know, the past 8 years or so, it really has come up that public cloud is great if you can get away with that. But there are instances where what people will call private cloud or hybrid cloud are needed. And in fact, I would almost say that for a lot of the types of ways that Pivotal Cloud Foundry is used, and for what our customers do, this question is almost a red herring, because we basically run on whatever type of infrastructure you want, whether you want to run on AWS and the partnership we have with CenturyLink, or you want to run on your own infrastructure on vSphere, or you want to run on OpenStack. A lot of what I think, and what Pivotal thinks a cloud platform does for you, is it doesn't really make you need to worry about the infrastructure you're running on, which means you can take advantage of infrastructure however you want. So I would more reframe that question to say that when you're considering what cloud platform to use, if you have to worry about if it's public or private cloud, then that's kind of a ding against it. You want to have multi-cloud optionality around it, rather than having that be something that you're concerned about. So you want the option to use, whatever tool is appropriate as needed. So let's see. There's two other questions that we can go over, I think, before we run out of time. And the other one is, so I didn't talk about, let's see, I didn't talk about programming languages much. So are there ones that are recommended for this? And yeah, that's actually a good question, because I've seen the nature of this change over recent years. So early on, if you wanted to be a cloud native, so to speak, you were kind of forced into using more of a polyglot approach. So you would use languages, like Python or Ruby, or more of the dynamic languages, just because the types of services available ran better with those types of languages. So that's a lot of what, and PHP, of course. You would see those languages used early on in kind of like the cloud native, I don't know, lifespan. This is several years back now. But because of a lot of the development that's been going on in open source communities like Cloud Foundry, which Pivotal Cloud Foundry is based on, things like Java are now very much so first-class citizens, and also things like .NET are first-class citizens in the cloud-native world. So really, you can use whatever programming languages you want to. And in fact, we see a wide different use of languages. Again, it's one of those like, use the tool that fits the job. Once you have the right kind of infrastructure in place, right kind of cloud platform in place, you should be able to focus on, just like with the private or public cloud thing, focus on whatever makes technology is helpful for you. So we talk a lot with larger companies, with enterprises, if you will, and governments, and a lot of them use and really like Java. So we also have a lot of the Spring Framework stuff, I guess all of it, so to speak, with us. So we have Spring Boot, and Spring Cloud and Spring XD and all sorts of other things kind of baked into Cloud Foundry as well. So Spring is something that we see a lot of usage with, along with all of the other sort of polyglottal languages that are out there. But again, this should be another way that you think about the cloud platform you use is don't worry about like picking the right language, worry about picking the right cloud platform that supports the language that you want to use. So this final question, it's a good bridge to looking towards the next part of it, where you look about how to work with legacy and how to transform the rest of the organization. And this question comes up a lot, and I like to call it the "so I'm going to be fired" question. And that is, what is the staffing needs for all of this look like? This seems to all imply that there's not really like operational people needed, right? So operations people tend to get really skittish at this part of the cloud native journey because there's not really a lot of like sysadminning needed. But in fact, I think there is more than ever operational knowledge is needed, right? It's just that where the operations knowledge sits moves, hopefully, thankfully, up in the organization. It moves to the application layer, hence DevOps and things like that, right? So as you have a really good public cloud infrastructure and you're automating it, and you have a good cloud platform on top of that that's automating resource allocation and deployment and how your middleware is running, you don't need people to manually every day operate that and work on it. So I'll get into this in the transformation section, but you almost see this tapered funnel where at the top of the organization you have more and more people focused on application development, and operations people up there focused on making sure that those applications can and are operated, right? And you have less and less people running the actual infrastructure, which is great. So if you're one of those people who really just wants to operate infrastructure and log in and like blow out caches and clear things, then maybe your job is at threat. But if you're interested in learning new things and actually getting closer to the actual usage and working more on the application side, then there's plenty of need for that, right? Like as a former developer person myself, like developers don't really want to do operations stuff, but they would like to have people on their team who can help out with that. So the organization, it tends to be very top-heavy. You tend to focus more and more on the business capabilities, on the actual applications that you're doing. And staffing tends to taper down the closer and closer you get to the metal, right? Until you get all the way to the bottom, like you still need people to manage the data centers, or you might outsource that to someone. You still need people to worry about getting your racks of servers and storage and networking racked up and wired up and done. And you still need people to worry about, you have to actually install and upgrade the infrastructure and the cloud platform software that you have. But at those lower levels, so much is automated that you don't need it in the same volume that you used to have. But again, I'll go over that in more depth, and you can read ahead by looking at the original blog post in the series in the transformation section if you're interested in what the organization looks like. And with that, we're out of time. We'll see if we can also address some of the questions through the keyboard instead of verbally here and get back to people. And as always, again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions or follow-up. And I'd be great to hear what you think about this and what your experiences are. And we'll see everyone else out there in the internet in the future where we all shall live. Goodbye.